Hello, my name is Clay Hanley. I'm the Associate Pastor here at the Pine Creek Valley Christian Church.
And my name is Ron Savitz. I am the pastor here at the Pine Creek Valley Christian Church, and we welcome you to our podcast today.
So today we want to talk about truth and what that means. And I think it's a growing issue in America. There just doesn't seem to be any real moral truth, at least not that anyone believes nowadays. There's just this blurred line, and the worst part is that in this society, the media, education, politics, everything seems to be encouraging this amorality that we're seeing everywhere. And, behavior follows belief.
Absolutely.
And so whenever you have false belief, then your behavior is going to follow accordingly. And there's this big lie out there that people believe, and that is that there's no such thing as absolute truth.
And we want to talk about that today because we believe, obviously, that there is such a thing as absolute truth, and it's already been revealed. The idea of what is truth goes clear back to the beginning of time.
Absolutely.
And you remember when Pilate was confronting Jesus, he asked that very question, what is truth? And Jesus basically says, I am the truth. And we'll elaborate on that a little more as we go through our discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
I looked up some information that I thought was relative to this question because we're living in an age where they use disinformation, they use misinformation, and they use malinformation. And I added one called repressed information. And I want to discuss these things and make the difference that so we can understand exactly what they are. Disinformation is false information that is deliberately created and disseminated with the idea of causing confusion or even harm. It's used usually by politicians or those who have financial or psychological or social motivations. They're trying to accomplish something for their own purpose. Misinformation is false, usually, but not intended to cause harm. For instance, someone on social media, Facebook or Twitter or something like that, may hear something that they think is true, pass it on, not realizing that it is true, but they have no intention of causing harm. In fact, they usually want to try to be helpful when they use that, but they're just not aware of all of the facts. Malinformation is information that is true and is shared with the intention, again, of harming someone or some kind of program that might be out there. This includes private or revealing information that is spread to harm a person or his reputation. And sometimes people do that intentionally just to destroy someone else, even on a personal basis. I included suppressed information because the Bible speaks about that. For instance, in Romans chapter 1, it says, the wrath of God is being revealed against all unrighteousness and ungodliness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And Peter talks about the fact that people intentionally ignore knowledge about creation, knowledge about the flood, knowledge about judgment is to come. And he uses a phrase in the New American Standard Bible that escapes their notice. The old King James Version says they're willingly ignorant. In other words, they just choose not to know. And there's a lot of information out there we can know about these historical events. We just ignore them. Mm-hmm. We just don't pay attention to them at all. So there's a lot of information out there that could be known, but because it disagrees with our particular philosophy or political view, we choose not to know it.
Now, I'm curious, we talked about how this big lie, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Where would you place that in disinformation, misinformation, malinformation? Where?
Well, I would place it in this idea that because people believe there is no absolute truth, they have no problem in accepting disinformation or misinformation, because in their minds there's no absolute truth to begin with. So what's your alternative? To believe something that's not true.
Right.
In fact, Paul tells us in the New Testament a little later on that because people refuse to believe the truth, that God himself would send strong delusion upon us. And I fear we've come to that point in America. That's what you were saying at the beginning when you were pointing out our beliefs are followed by our actions. When we believe something that's wrong and we follow that, our actions are going to end up being wrong.
Mm-hmm. And it's no wonder that the world has turned out the way it has under those circumstances.
Absolutely. In fact, if you study history, I'm thinking of a fellow by the name of Auden, A-U-D-E-N, who became so disgusted discussing and discovering what happened in Nazism in Germany that he actually concluded there has to be absolute truth in order to avoid that kind of evil.
Huh.
I'm trying to remember which book it was in. I think it's one that was put out by not Jonathan Cahn. I'm thinking maybe Rabbi Zacharias was the author of that, but I'm not sure. I should have marked that down.
That's fascinating, though.
Yes, it is. And that leads me to at least say these two things about why knowing truth is important. Number one, because untruth enslaves us. It puts us in bondage of one kind of thing or another. If there's no absolute moral truth, it doesn't make any difference what I do, what I believe, how I act. And that ultimately leads to some kind of personal or even national bondage. If a whole group of people believes that, then they can fall for any kind of truth that exists.
Now, can you take a moment to talk about the difference to being a slave to untruth versus being a slave to the truth?
Well, you've already pointed it out. Being a slave to untruth affects what we do morally, how we treat our fellow man, whether we have any respect for authority. Look what's happening in America today with defunding the police, with the riots that's going on in our cities. They're believing a lie. And that lie is leading to rebellion. That lie is leading to not only disenchantment with what's going on, but rebelling against all kinds of authority and all kinds of civilization. So I think that's one of the basic fundamental things that's wrong with our society right now, is because people believe there's no absolute truth, that everything's relative. What I believe and what I think and what I do is okay for me, whether it affects anybody else or not. And our actions, whether we want to deal with it or not, our actions always affect somebody else.
Right.
The second reason why we need to believe that truth is it's truth that sets us free and keeps us free. You know, Jesus one time talking to the Pharisees in the New Testament very plain said, it is the truth that will set you free. You should know it. The truth will set you free. And I maintain that's what keeps us free. In order for darkness, morally or in any other way, to exist, it has to be sustained by lies. It cannot be sustained by truth. Truth always brings us into light, always brings us into a greater knowledge. Now, for instance, there are things that are true whether I choose to believe them or not. I was thinking the other day, you can deny the fact that there is such a thing as law of gravity until you jump off of a building.
Right.
That's going to prove to you that law exists whether you believe it or not. Or if you don't believe that electricity exists, just grab a hold of 220 volt line sometime and you'll discover it's there whether you want to believe it or not. So, and there's moral truths like that. we reap what we sow. We're responsible for our own actions. And I'll think about that again, Clay. One of the things that we have done today is blame somebody else for what we do. It was my parents' fault, or it's our society's fault, or it's where we live, that our circumstances has caused all of this. But man has always been able to rise above those kind of things and make the right choices. Where does that ability come from?
Mm-hmm.
So if there was no such thing as moral truth, that ability wouldn't exist either. We can make choices. We're responsible for those choices.
I heard a story on the radio yesterday, and I think it applies to what we're talking about now, and you may have heard it. It was a guy who was preaching a sermon. He was talking about he was letting his dog outside, and they found what seemed to be a pet bird out in the grass. And the bird was terrified because of his big dog, and it was scared that the dog was going to eat it. But, it seemed like a pet bird, so he reached down, and sure enough, the bird jumped onto his finger. And he took it inside and was showing his wife. And he said, let's get a bird cage so that we can, put it somewhere. And so his son went over to the neighbor's house. Their bird had just died, and he brought a bird cage home. And as soon as he opened up the bird cage, the bird flew right in, was singing and dancing, running across back and forth on the thing. Because to the bird, that cage wasn't a prison. It wasn't a slave, but rather that cage was its protection. It was protecting it from the dog. It was protecting it from all the outside things that were trying to harm it. And I think whenever we talk about being a slave to Christ or a slave to the truth or something like that, that's what we're getting at. That this truth is going to protect us from all of these lies that are out there. It's going to protect us from the attacks of the devil and so on and so forth.
Yes, because falsehood always leads to wrong conclusions, and as you've already pointed out, leads to wrong behavior. The New Testament talks about the perfect law of liberty in the sense that it keeps us from, it doesn't imprison us, but it keeps us from doing things that would ultimately harm us or someone else. So it's, in a sense, it's a protection for us rather than a bondage for us.
Mm-hmm.
And think again, in our society today, laws are made to protect the innocent.
Right.
There are always going to be people who will break the laws, but when we have a justice system that is based on truth, it's going to protect the innocent and prosecute those who are guilty. In order to have that, you have to have moral truth. You have to have what is considered absolute truth. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. If we don't accept that, then nothing is wrong and I can do anything that I please regardless of how much it may hurt others. That's exactly what's wrong with socialism and communism and that kind of thing, is that it usually has no moral barriers, ultimately.
Mm-hmm. And we're going to get more into that in the future. And this is going to apply to what we're going to be talking about in the next podcast. And that'll be AI and artificial intelligence and how the truth and lies was going to affect that in years to come. And the challenges that we as Christians especially face as that begins to integrate into our everyday lives more and more. And following that, we're going to be discussing creationism versus evolution and how that has damaged society so much, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I want to make just one more statement by way of conclusion. The Bible says there are several things that God hates. One is a lying tongue, and the other is a false witness, because of the consequences of both. Wars have been fought over lies, and think of all the destruction that has caused throughout history. So it's very important that we know the truth, and it is knowable, and we can discover it if we look at the truth that is in Christ. He said, he doesn't say, I'll show you the way of truth. He said, I am the truth.
Right, and that's all we can do as Christians, right? We can't we can't force other people to accept the truth. People are going to believe what they believe, whether that's right or wrong. But as Christians, we are obligated to hold to the truth.
Absolutely.
And to accept the fact that there is one objective truth, and that is Christ and the gospel that we've received from him.
Absolutely.
And so, don't be discouraged with everything that you're seeing in the world. Judgment Day is going to come, and it's going to come sooner than later. And so just hold to the truth. Have confidence.
And we trust that you will seek the truth for your life as well as for those you love, because that will give them guidance throughout all of their lives.
Absolutely. Okay, my name is Clay Hanley. I'm the associate pastor here at the Pine Creek Valley Christian Church.
And my name is Ron Savitz, the senior pastor here at the Pine Creek Valley Christian Church. And we, again, pray God's blessings upon you.